The gaming industry has taken the world by storm since the 1970s. Technological advancements over the past several decades have allowed PC, mobile, and console games to incorporate new designs and new storylines. These advances have helped the industry to expand dramatically, attracting diverse audiences with various interests, including sports, music, and current events. Recorded at South by Southwest 2022, this episode explores how video games have become not only a hobby, but also even an avenue for activism. Welcome to Dissidents and Dictators, a series of conversations by the Human Rights Foundation dedicated to exposing and challenging authoritarianism around the world.
Well, let's get started. Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. We are the Human Rights Foundation. We're an international human rights organization that focuses on non-democratic societies and tries to unite the world in the struggle for democracy and against authoritarianism all over the world. We are very excited to be back in South by Southwest. We usually in person, we've been for several years, and this is an excellent opportunity to meet with so many wonderful creative people who may be interested in furthering this cause. We're also the producers of the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is our annual human rights conference in Oslo, Norway, where we bring together an eclectic group of people from the media, the arts, public policy, to meet with human rights activists that are fighting the good fight on the front lines and where they're most at risk. Today we bring you this panel for gaming and activism, and we try to explore a little bit the intersection of gaming and the gaming industry and how games can be an incredible vehicle for activism and the struggle for freedom. So we were joined by Kristin Bässe, that you see her on the screen right there. She is the public relations manager of Reporters Without Borders and the project manager of the Uncensored library. She will tell us a little bit more about that in a second. We're also joined by Jerry Chan. He's an artist and game developer from Hong Kong, and one of the founders of the Zeitgeist Studio, and we're working on a particular video game that he will also tell us a little bit more about that. And to my left here is Navid Khonsari. He is a game developer. He's worked in the game industry for several years, worked on several AAA titles, and he's the founder of Ink Stories, another independent studio that does some fantastic work. I'm Alvaro Piaggio, and I'm a policy advisor at HRF, and once again, I welcome you all. I want to start first with Kristin. I want you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, the work you do at Reporters Without Borders, and specifically tell us about the Uncensored library. What is it, and how does it fit into this app?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for letting me join in this interesting panel from Berlin, where I am at the moment. I'm Kristin Bässe, as you mentioned, and I'm doing especially media work for Reporters Without Borders in Germany, but in the specific case of this campaign that we did, the Uncensored Library, we created an international campaign for RSF, so that's why I'm speaking today. And yeah, we mentioned the Uncensored Library already. As the name tells us, it's a library that uncensors information, and the creative thing about this is that it's a library in the computer game, so in the computer game Minecraft. We created the library because Minecraft is available in almost every country in the world, and it's one of the most played games around the world, and we had the idea that this can be used to circumvent censorship. So we uploaded articles that are censored in the computer game, and people from everywhere around the world can read articles by entering our server by playing Minecraft and by entering the Uncensored library.
Thank you, Kristin. Jerry, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your work, about the game you're working on.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for the kind introduction from Alvaro, and nice to meet you all. So my name is Jerry Chan, the co-founder of an indie game company called Zeitgeist Studio. So our team has 4 Hong Kong teammates. They are located around the world, and another co-founder, Mandy, and I are based in New Jersey right now. So currently we are developing a game, a 2D adventure game called Name of the Wheel, which is inspired by the Hong Kong protests against the Chinese Communist Party happening in 2019. And it is a story about you waking up in a uniform community with fake harmony, and you have to figure out why you got there. And then during the journey, you will disclose some secret about this community, and then you have to decide what to do next, whether you want to fight against it, you want to just go away, or you want to just live with it. It's up to you. And more importantly, you have to think about how much you are willing to sacrifice for each of the decisions. Whether you want to sacrifice your friendship or your integrity. So that's basically the game we're making. And I think that would be a game with the challenge morally in some sense.
Thank you, Jerry. Navid, tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your work, and ink stories.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the Human Rights Foundation for having me here, and welcome everyone. My name is Navid Khonsari. We have a studio in New York called Ink Stories. Ink Stories is an entertainment company that focuses on creating social impact stories, but at the same time using key pillars of production, so high production value, engage and entertain, and kind of subtextually be able to get your message across. Our first project was 1979 Revolution Black Friday, which is based on the Iranian Revolution and brings in multiple elements of people's personal experiences, but bases it in the game design of a choose-your-own adventure game. That game was quite successful for us and opened up a lot of doors. It provided the first BAFTA nomination for a Muslim actor, and while it was banned in Iran, the prowess and its growth in the West opened up people's eyes to the difference between the government and its people, and obviously we're seeing that example in Russia right now, the difference between its government and its people and the challenges that exist there. We went on to then do a virtual reality piece, which was a 20 by 30 piece called Hero, that puts you on the streets of Syria, so you can actually go past the pictures that we were getting fed about these areas that have been bombed out and just covered in dust, but actually breathe life into this so you could see that they're no different than us. And I think the objective that we have, aside from other projects that we've done, and one project in particular that's here is called Blindfold, which is playing, Blindfold VR is playing at the booth for the Human Rights Foundation. You guys should swing by there. Is what's it like to be a journalist who's forced to confess? Forced confessionals are psychologically not only damaging, but really hard actually once you kind of come out of it and come to your home. How do you confess to that? So we did that with the Committee to Protect Journalists and worked with the Iranian Human Rights Group out of New York, and created an experience through the nodding of yes and no of how you kind of manage and navigate your way through this confession. So those are just a sprinkle of projects that we've done. And I think that the core for us, aside from also working on an entertainment games, the thing that's been the most interesting is the power that this medium has. Unlike anything else, unlike television, unlike film, and I hate to say it because I love reading, but unlike literature, gaming is the most powerful medium that we have that allows you to put somebody in the shoes of the other, and in that kind of create some empathy and hope and kind of concern, but also the challenges that kind of exist for all of us as we kind of navigate the crazy kind of global political world that we're in. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you, Navid, for bringing it up. I forgot to mention at the beginning, but we have a booth here at the Creative creative arts exhibit here in the convention center, and you can stop by and you can experience, like Navid said, blindfold. You can play the games for a little bit. There's also information. You can also play with an uncensored library in Minecraft, see what it's all about, and you can also see a preview of Jerry's game, Name of the Will, which is beautiful artwork. I encourage everyone to stop by later and take a look. To continue a little bit with Navid said, the last thing that you said about the power of this medium, like video games, right? It's become such a incredibly popular. I think everyone, especially younger generations now, we grew up with this medium, and it's in a way overtaken a lot of traditional mediums such as movies and TV in a way. So I wanted to ask you more about how you see the power of this medium, and also why you chose to work on this. And to follow up a little bit on that, I want to ask you your personal experiences. How did you first discover the power of these games? Because I'm sure it came before you became a developer, before you started working on this project. So what opened your eyes to this, and how you see the video games in general in this work? Kristin?
I think, when I really realized the power of games, and what I could say as an example was when I played Never Alone. I think it was 8 years ago when I first played it, or when it was developed, and it's quite obvious a game that includes gaming experience as well as a serious topic. In this case, it's about the culture of the people in northern Alaska, and it's quite, very beautifully made, and it includes a few short documentaries in the game, and I think it's a nice example. Or I think that was the first time when it was very obvious for me that games can also be serious and also include information, and also transport more than entertainment. Even though, of course, I used to play a lot of Game Boy and Pokemon when I was younger, and there, I could see that it was the most interesting thing for me to interact with other people online, or exchange, like the Pokemon, for example. And I think this is also one aspect that the interaction and really that you have a whole new world where you can interact with people online games. This is also another aspect that fascinates me around games, and which also made me aware that it can be a tool to bring about social change, but also to raise awareness, which we also did with the Uncensored library, and here the interaction and online communication is a really big part of the project.
Thank you, Kristin. Derek?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kristin. I think interaction is definitely a very significant attribute of video game as a media. So actually, our team is actually a newbie in game industry, and I'm an artist. And what brought me to this game industry is, I think we should go back to the protest in 2019, because just back then, Mandy and I were out of Hong Kong, and then we felt so helpless because we couldn't help what was happening in our home. We were watching the screen of the street protest while we were watching the window peacefully with some bird flying over. So that's a big contrast and pretty stressful and frustrated. And then we wanted to contribute to the protest, and we want to respond to the protest. And so that we tried a video game as a medium to respond to it. But why did we choose the medium? Because our team believed that, I think since the Tunisian revolution, I think the activism has become more information-oriented and also digitalized. So we think video game is actually an experience of accumulation of information. To be more accurate, I meant RPG games, strategic games, and also some narrative-based games. So they are all based on information. So that's why I can see many Hong Kong game developers, including us, are choosing this medium to respond to the protest. Either they are supporting the protest or opposing the protest. So that's what brought us to this incident.
Thank you.
What was the question again? Just got so caught up in it.
Yeah,
Just the background?
yeah, tell us a little bit how you got into making games that you make, right? Because you've had a long career of with 1979 and stories, but at some point I think in your younger life before you became a developer, you probably saw the power of games. It's not just entertainment.
Yeah,
it's like any form of art. You can express pretty much anything you want. It gives you a lot of freedom. So tell me when was that discovery for you?
My discovery was probably when I was 11 years old. My family had just left Iran. It was during the U.S. hostage crisis, and we had landed in Canada. I couldn't speak English that well. Felt a fair amount of animosity from people because it was the first Christmas that the hostages weren't going to be home, and we had on ABC, Ted Koppel, I think it was like day 32, it was just this continual countdown. And so actually, having played video games that were just of that era, which wasn't that many, was really the only ways I was able to actually kind of break that ground with the other kids in the playground. It has, and this is something larger, America's greatest export, hands down, will always be pop culture. And so that pop culture, and particularly video games, was the first time that I was able to kind of transcend differences between myself and other kids in the playground and be able to kind of communicate. And then that had that moment, I guess, first, but then I went on and became a film student, graduated, and when I joined up with the guys at Rockstar Games, I came on board to direct the GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, and multiple games at Rockstar as the cinematic director, and that was definitely eye-opening to seeing the power that gaming actually has to create community, to create dialogue, the water cooler conversation, and then just to kind of, I went back to Iran in 2006, the first time I'd been back in 25 years, and drove the entire country. And I was up in a small town towards Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, a place called Gombad, where they had only like 2 PCs in the whole village. I'm the only Iranian that's credited on the Grand Theft Auto game, so all these kids and teenagers showed up and they're like, oh, they wanted to talk to me. And what really kind of switched the light for me, or kind of flipped it over, was this young girl who kind of came to her own conclusion that living in America must be fantastic. And what was crazy was that we've got next door in Iraq, the US invasion, and in Afghanistan, we're seeing tons of Afghani refugees going into Iran, and she has this opinion. And so I kind of asked her about it, and she said the fact that she has the freedom to, when she plays Grand Theft Auto, to listen to the music that she wants to listen to on the radio, be able to drive, be able to go put on different outfits, do all the things that are really outside of the main campaigns or however the games have been kind of marketed. And that was it. When I kind of saw that, that became kind of the initial start for 1979 and recognizing that, look, we're at South by Southwest, there's a lot of gaming stuff going on, and what's happening in the gaming industry in general is that everyone's looking at what Hollywood's doing and what all, and following that model. But if you take a look at Hollywood, documentaries were actually the first film format before films came out. And all we gotta do is we just gotta slightly turn a little bit to the left and take a look at all these possibilities and opportunities that this medium has to connect to people and just tell different stories. And that's it. And audiences are changing. It's no longer about just having these, these triggers of one versus one compete. The competition will always exist. It's the nature of the foundation of games. But people are now more into experiences, and I feel like, these from being 10 years old to being in Iran, these experiences have been about kind of human connection through an experience that you've had digitally. And And I think that there's a great potential for it, and that's been kind of the spark that's kept us going at Ink Stories with our other projects.
Thank you, Navid. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, it is, like most art, we can use it to express anything we want, right? Like you said, create that human connection. So I want to ask all of you, just now following up on your work as developers, and you're working on the Uncensored library, and also something you mentioned around about how the industry is, right? Like how we look at Hollywood and try to follow what Hollywood is doing, which you try to entertain and get as many people as you want to subscribe to seats. Obviously, you have to. It's something that you can't look past, which is like making the game entertaining, right? Appealing to a proper audience if you want. Without, that doesn't mean that you have to stop your message. You have to stop telling your message. But how do you balance that? What are the challenges in that? Like, how do you make a project both appealing, but also still tell the story you want to tell? Right? So, Jerry, if you want to start with this one.
Sure. I think we've gone through a few challenges. One of the challenges is that because when it comes to this kind of political creation, and then we have to, and about storytelling, our challenge was how to be better how much we should refer to a real issue, as we discussed before. And because if we go too specific, the spectrum of the audience may narrow down, so that's why we have decided to make it fictional in order to access to a wider audience. And also, talking about the degree of how much we refer to a real issue, we also don't want to re-traumatize some victim of the real event. That maybe and Kristin can add opinions on that. Because that's why we were picking up the material very carefully, such as we don't want to just depict the street fighting scene very explicitly. We try to make it more implicitly, so that people can take the core of it, but without being re-traumatized.
I want you to tell what you think about it, and then I'm going to go back to Kristin and ask you a little more specific about the Uncensored library, also related to this issue.
So I think one of the lessons I learned when I was at Rockstar was the importance of production value, right? In the end, you need to kind of package it up as you're making a project that's going to be able to compete or be on the shelves with these other projects. So I think that's what we kind of did. You have to entertain, you have to engage. That's first and foremost. You're on the shelf with all the other projects that are out there. So you need to have that as a key pillar, if that's a key pillar for them. In the end, you're a storyteller, and I don't know about you, but I want to share my story with as many people as I can. So I've got to make sure I figure out how to not open that door. So that was the key for us. I think we had multiple kind of challenges of some people who were afraid of sharing their stories because of like retribution that might take place within Iran. Obviously, we went about it anonymously, but when you're working with actors that you're bringing in and so forth, there's challenges there. We had probably 30% of the people that worked on the game asked not to be credited. That does not happen. The game got banned in Iran within 2 weeks, and I was written up as a spy. So these are like the legitimate fallout of kind of what happens. But I think whenever you're going to make anything political, you're going to have these blockers. We had challenges with Apple because they thought that it was a little too political for them, and so they held our hand all the way and then released it. And then we won Indiecade, and they had all the Indiecade selects in the App Store, like in one of their editorials, and we won the grand jury, and we're the only game that was left out. So you're gonna. These are the challenges that you have. But you have to think about the larger audience. You have to think about the community. You have to think about if you're making something about Iran, if you're making something about Hong Kong, where's the biggest audience? How are you going to be able to appeal to them? If they're Western audiences, how do you do that? Because if you go too far down one path, if you make it too legitimate, if you make it too authentic, then are you actually alienating a larger audience? So these are some of the challenges that kind of exist. But I think the most important thing is, regardless of all the challenges, what will always appeal to audiences is your ability as a developer to make it personal. Humans, audiences have the sophistication and the ability to kind of see through that, regardless of what the gameplay is. And if sometimes the gameplay sucks, they'll still be forgiving if you're actually pushing something that they can kind of connect to. So there is that balance of it. But I do think you have to take a look at what the industry is doing, recognize what are the key pillars of why those projects are successful. How can you adapt that to what you're doing and yet make sure you keep it personal? And then obviously the biggest challenge, doing it within a much smaller budget, because your budgets are never going to be the size of what these AAA or AA or even some of the established indie places are doing. So I think that's kind of the mix.
Yeah, thank you. I have something to add on. I agree that audience are sophisticated enough to see through that, because we had made a prototype before making this game, and Mandy just made a prototype exactly based on the story of Hong Kong, which is also the game that you have to make decisions what the next step is. And then we just let some friends from America to play it, and then their feedback was, I still, although I don't actually know about the story behind it, when I play through it, I can have the resonance. I can feel that what you're feeling. So I think that's also
absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Kristin, I don't want to leave you out. So I want you to tell me a little bit, your take on this. Obviously, specific tech game developer, but the challenge is that in introducing these messages into games, and now that we're here, I also wanted to, if you could tell us a little bit more about what are the challenges of distributing this project, right? Like, how do you get to the places where you have the most censorship, for example, right?
Distributing is not the main problem, but also what Jerry already said about how we can be explicit or not, and also when we said that we still want to be entertaining and not find balance. I think that's also what was a challenge for our project, because we couldn't be as explicit in some cases because some of the journalists involved still live in the countries where we want to publish the content, so we didn't want to put them in danger, and we tried to publish their articles anonymously, just to be sure that everyone is safe who is involved in the project. And then for the other countries, we try to work with journalists that live in exile, so we know that everyone is okay with being exposed through this campaign. So this was one challenge we had while making the game, but of course, it's also a challenge to distribute it in the target countries that we actually wanted to publish the uncensored content. But we had a lot of help from the gaming community, because I think the building that we created, the library itself, is quite impressive for people who play Minecraft. So it's quite an impressive building that people want to explore and actually find out more about. So it was shared thousands of times on YouTube and YouTube videos, and also online from players to other players. So it was quite helpful that it was an impressive building itself that we could transport our messages with, so that we could actually show that press freedom is relevant for democracies all over the world, and that especially in countries like Russia or Egypt, Vietnam, anywhere where we can see censorship, it's very important that we could find a way to publish these articles, to publish the articles there again.
Thank you, Kristin. Go ahead.
No, I don't know. Maybe someone else wants to add on. I can also tell you more about the reaction, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about the topic of censorship, right? Because that is sadly is a rising trend in the world. We've seen a democratic recession, if you may, all over the world, and that is seeping through also in democratic societies. We see sometimes the influence, for example, of China in media in the United States, forcing a lot of people to self-censor. But overall, we see this as emboldened autocrats from over the world. Perhaps the most tragic and horrible example is the example of the invasion of Ukraine in Eastern Europe. But Kristin, you work with Reporters Without Borders, and obviously your job is to try to monitor and help preserve journalistic freedom all over the world. And so I wanted to ask you, in the face of this trend, how do you see the future of art and specifically games and the work that you're doing and the work that maybe even developers like Jerry are doing?
Like what you already mentioned with Russia and Ukraine, I think it's really sad to see how information is treated in Russia. Nothing like maybe you can see that I'm quite emotional when I talk about this because it's very, it's so sad to see that all of the journalists, like hundreds of journalists, are leaving Russia because they are not able to report anymore. They are not allowed to use a specific word. They can't really get into, they are in danger of their lives. They would be imprisoned if they say a specific word. And we could see that there are really brave journalists, like the woman who was in TV, holding up the sign to protest, but this is it's really brave to do that, and it's really, there's no way to inform the public through traditional media at the moment. So this is where actually creativity has to step in to also give hope to people, to show that there is a way to access information, and that the other people are there to show solidarity, to circumvent censorship. I think it was also quite a creative idea to use Google Maps votings to write about the situation in Russia and Ukraine. But there have to be creative ideas to give hope.
Right, thank you. Jerry, you have something to say about this?
Speaking on the censorship, I'm actually glad that I'm in the US, so I have the privilege to have more freedom of speech that where some Hong Kong people are not having, because it reminds me of one of my friends who is also a game developer who has launched a game to archive some of the history of Hong Kong. And since the national implementation of the national security law in Hong Kong, he has to self-censor inevitably to cut off some of the some part of the games to get rid of the risk. And as of what I've said, that I think the physical restriction doesn't confine the freedom or free will. I think if we can't do it explicitly, just do it implicitly. So that's why I can feel that, especially the creator in every kind of medium, they tend to, under the oppression regime, they tend to make something that is, if you get it, you will get it. Use understatement to express what they are believing.
Definitely. Navid, you want to add a little bit more of that with the visual censorship and how you see the industry going forward in this context?
I think censorship is everywhere in terms of, it's also being pushed on by the industry that we're in. I mean, we have ratings for projects, so there's that aspect of it that exists right here domestically. I think, if you're creating anything political in a weird way, it's automatically getting marginalized by the industry itself, right? Like the fact that we have to have a talk about like gaming and activism is like those things should just not be separated. This should be all inclusive. We're self-censoring ourselves as a medium because we're trying to say what it's supposed to be and what it shouldn't be. And I think that it starts within the industry itself, and then it also has it kind of coming from the top down from people that have different interests. So it definitely exists. But look, I think it's a game. So you got to be smart enough, and you got to play the game right, and you got to figure out how you can get your content out there to the audiences and go through that challenges. Censorship's always going to exist. People are going to try to poo-poo some of the ideas that you have because of its political validity or who you are as an individual and what you might be connected to and so forth. These are all just, I think you just kind of go in there with open eyes and just be like, all right, these are the challenges that I have and these are the things I'm going to kind of have to navigate and kind of get around. And I think the one great way of being able to bypass or at least have that support is doing things where instead of just releasing your game, you start building a community from the get-go. Whether it's even from like the idea of putting up some concept art or putting up some elements, you start talking about that, and funny enough, you'll draw people to come in your community who are actually initially just interested in the subject matter. So, you build a community, that community becomes your foundation to bypass censorship that's coming from all these different directions.
A couple of follow-ups on the things you mentioned. Do you think that maybe the fact that video games are still not seen as a higher form of art has a little bit to do with the studios or the industry being dismissive of using games for anything other than just simply entertaining or simply just passing the time?
Well, I mean, I personally think it's a generational thing, right? And people naturally, change is hard for industries to kind of take on. The gaming audience is actually very receptive and very, very open in terms of kind of experiences. I've kind of always felt that they're at the forefront of change. But then also you have just a huge smatter of like alpha males who just want to play shooters, which is just as great, and I don't discredit that at all. It's another sliver. It just winds up becoming identified as what people who don't play gaming see gaming as, and so as a result, it just kind of discredits the larger medium. So I think that the challenge that we kind of have is not whether gaming is seen as an art form. It's those who want to kind of confine it to what they think it is. And you can talk all about the numbers, and it makes more money than Hollywood. GTA 5 made $1 billion in 3 days, blowing any blockbuster. But if you make that the point, then you say, well, I now want to compare myself to you. Right? I want to compare myself to film. I want to compare myself to television. But you can't play television. You can't play a movie. A movie is 1.5 hours. It's on a screen. You can get into a world, and that special element of that is what needs to be celebrated, and that's the art thing. The art of the work that goes into the creation of that. So people are always going to argue about, if they want to argue about what's art, then tell them to jump next door to the NFT conversations, because that's NFT and gaming is kind of coming in that kind of blows away all of that film stuff.
That's great. Jared, Navid mentioned building communities, and your game, it was how your project started. How did you start initially funding? You had Kickstarter, right? You had a Kickstarter campaign. So tell a little bit about that and how it's been received and the process of building that community.
Sure. Actually, our team has launched a Kickstarter campaign last year, and we're glad that we went pretty successful. And we also thought about what's the reason of our success of the campaign, and we think part of the reason may be about the political environment in Hong Kong under a very oppressive fight, and there's no more freedom of speech, freedom of rally. There's no legal rally anymore, and then there's no way out to resolve their resentment. So that, I think the rebellion in Hong Kong just went more subtle. So I think the cultural influence is a great way to sort it out. So that's why I think that makes people more, that encourage people to endorse this kind of cultural project like us.
That's fantastic. So one last question about, I want to continue with censorship. Kristin, I'm sure you've heard news of obviously you probably talk about things like this, but bans in authoritarian countries, like in China, for example. China has banned, or at least partially banned, Steam, one of the largest, if not the largest game distribution platform on the planet. So, how does that affect now work of something like obviously Minecraft's not the same, but how does that affect similar projects perhaps, or people wanting to bring similar messages into China and other societies like that? How does that type of something, that heavy-handed censorship affect it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important issue that the more popular protests and activism in games become, I think they are also more likely to become a type of censorship, and this is what we are seeing now. And I think it's how nice it is that we find this way for activism. I think unfortunately authoritarian countries are always not far ahead when people have these creative ideas. But still, I mean, another example that we have is that Russia's media regulator, who's also responsible for censoring so many websites in Russia, is trying to create an AI to search for bad content in video games, which is always two-sided. Of course, it's also content that has to be deleted, but it could also be political content. So what I want to say is that there are new developments to bring about social change, but also new developments from the authoritarian countries to suppress these protests and these activism. So even though it's not affecting Minecraft at the moment or the area that we have, but it's still a bit worrying to see that we try to give this example of how to circumvent censorship, and then we can also see at the same time how authoritarian countries try to suppress these creative ideas. But I don't want to say that we shouldn't do it, but it's still it's more a reason to do it because we have to fight for it even more, and we have to find other ways, and we have to, we shouldn't stop finding ways to circumvent censorship.
But can I jump in, because I think it's important to just ask actually one major question. What are you trying to activate? That's the most important. What are you trying to, I'm not saying to you, I'm just saying in general, I think the question should be, what are you trying to activate? If you're doing a project about the protests in Hong Kong because you want to, are you trying to tell that story because that story hasn't been able to get outside of that area and share it with the world? So then therefore you're actually not trying to get into the country, right? So if Steam gets blocked, is it actually for the people in China that you're making this game, or is it actually for the rest of the world to understand what's taking place in Hong Kong so that they can actually, the next time an event takes place, they're aware of what's taking place? So I think it's actually, right? So I think
you're right, because that's exactly what I was saying, that we shouldn't stop doing this because there's a way to make people aware of these topics all over the world. But in the specific case of the Uncensored library, we want to bring the uncensored content to the people in countries like Russia, for example. So it wouldn't be censored there, it wouldn't help our cause, but still, what we saw with the Uncensored library, that we could make people all over the world, and especially young people, aware of the situation of censorship. So this is exactly what you're saying, Navid, that what do we want to activate? I think we want to activate the world, and we want to highlight, or we want to make everyone aware of what is happening, and this is how, like, what games can do, that we can reach new, like, people differently, and we can make people differently aware of what's happening.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really great point on, you know, how authoritarian regimes don't. It's not just about controlling their own populations. They don't want the world to know, right?
But also, it's not just the government; it's also the media.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so, right, I'll give you a quick example. When we did 1979, I used to have a conversation with friends of mine, assuming that all women in Iran are always veiled. And when I told them that my mother from birth, her birth until we left Iran, had never ever worn a chador, ever. My grandmother, who prayed three times a day, she would only wear it when she was praying. She never wore it, and she was old, and she came from Azerbaijan down into Iran. When you can in a game show that in 1979, and everybody who's born after 1979 sees of Iran is mullahs and women covered in veils. That's all they know. So what you're activating is opening eyes to something that actually has been there and has changed. And so it's not just the government that's saying this is what we are. It's also how the history of that moment has been reflected through the press, through other forms of media. So that's what you're trying to kind of counter. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, when you're creating something, you're creating it for a larger audience to actually activate change because of an agenda or a narrative that's being told that's not true to actually the activities that are taking place, and the ability of that government and that press to suppress it and to navigate that to be specific to that. So I think it's, you know, there's these other things that kind of get triggered off as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I really understand. Yeah, so we're running out of time, but I want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions if you have any questions, any of our panelists. Before we start, I wanted to ask you, Kristin and Jerry, maybe tell us where we can find you on social media, where we can see your projects and whatnot. Kristin?
Yeah, so the Uncensored library is reachable via uncensoredlibrary.com, and you can also access it online by the link visit uncensoredlibrary.com. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, please call.
There?
You're welcome to follow our Instagram account, name of the will, and also you can check updates on our website, zeitgeiststudio.net, to check out latest posts.
Inkstories.com. Pretty much all our games are on 1979s on all platforms. Blindfolds and PSVR, it's over there, also at the auditorium. Our other projects are on Steam, so we're just kind of, just go to inkstories.com, and that'll give you all the social media and everything else that we've got. Yeah.
Thank you.